what am I saying? A certificate, excuse me. A certificate I would suggest that is worthy putting on the wall. So if you'll fill out this form for me, it'll help me do that. On the bottom of it, the way you'd like to see your name on that certificate, please fill out the top so that your name is the way you'd like to see it on the certificate. If you have a nickname or something, put it in parentheses so we can discern the difference. On the bottom, we ask you, what do you perceive as aggression where you work? It helps us get a better sense for what you perceive as aggression, so please fill out that part as well. I'm going to be with you for the rest of the day, so if you have questions of me, I know that I'm covering a great deal of material in a very short time. So if you have a question for me afterwards, you assimilate one, don't hesitate to come up to me and ask. I would like to leave here knowing that you've got as good an understanding of this as I'm able to offer. Was there a question over here? Yes? I'm sorry? My mic is not on?
Yeah, we're working on it.
Oh, yes, question. The registration form, you haven't received one, then there'll be one on the front desk if you haven't received it already. Are there any questions about anything that I have covered so far? Okay, hearing none, let's move forward. As I said, I've got a great deal of information to offer in a very short period of time, so I'm going to try to go through it rather quickly, but I want you to have the time to get a better understanding of it. So, as I said, I'll be around, so just corner me during the breaks and I'll be happy to help. If you want to purchase a book out there and have me sign it, I'll be here with you throughout the end of the day. After I leave, Marion will still have some books out there. If you still want to purchase one, you can use a credit card or cash. If you decide to use cash, just give me $30 as opposed to $32.95, and we'll call ourselves even. That'll make it easier for some of you, because I don't have a lot of change. Okay, here we go. So let's review for just a moment. We have the primal aggression continuum. We have the cognitive aggression continuum. We notice how they are the trigger phase, the escalation phase, the fact that their conflict begins at the 4th level, bullying begins at the 4th level, discrimination starts at the 4th level. Now, I'll say this to you, that's where when you get to the 4th level, this is someone who is actively going against another individual. This is when someone is actively going against another. We're a bit tinty. Can we lower it just ever so slightly? Or can everybody hear me okay? Okay, then we'll leave it then. All right. In the first 3 levels, it is often more about the aggressor than it is the victim. At the 4th level, it is usually directed toward a victim, or victims plural. But during stages 1, 2, and 3, this can be an individual who is profoundly distrustful. Remember we talked about how trust is an important element, that aggression diminishes trust? So it could be someone profoundly distrustful, someone who is profoundly biased, someone who is profoundly inconsiderate. These are people, it's more about them than it is about a victim. Once we get to the 4th level, we see a victim and we can engage on that way. But in stages 1, 2, and 3, we often need to approach this person more about their own inadequacies and their own issues and address them in the realm of, we have choices and there are consequences and rewards from our choices, and approach them more on that level than otherwise. Okay, then we have cognitive aggression, that primal and cognitive is conjoined during the escalation phase, where one builds off the other. I gave the example with Michael, where one is building off the other, and then we enter into the crisis phase, where they begin to divert. On the primal side, they are moving toward, again, losing control, and they're moving towards rage or that sort of thing, panic and or rage. On the cognitive side, they're becoming tactical. And that word is particularly important to you because the behavior you will observe is tactical behavior. Now, remember we talked about the video clip up front that you saw identifying the terrorist? That's how we're going to identify this person, this person or persons, because the behavior is tactical. You could put weapons in their hands and a uniform on them and they would be completely consistent. The behavior is almost like a squad. So be aware of that because that's how you identify it. In addition to the body language, which you can see that 1,000-yard stare, and as I said, the body language behavior, the Israelis call it the walking dead. That loss of animation is reflected throughout their being. The body is literally responding to this intention by saying, I'm dead. And it reflects that. Okay, so let's break this down once into its parts. First of all, the primal aggression continuum. What is it predicated on? There's an incredible hint behind me. What? Loss of control. Primal aggression is based upon adrenaline, yes. It is that connection between aggression, the production of adrenaline, the increase in the heart rate, and the resulting body language and behavior. Brett, that wasn't the right answer. But what it also reflects is someone losing control. In the extreme, this person can be lethal. But most typically, this person can be diffused. Now, have you ever seen someone go from the red face, ready to explode, and then suddenly they become quiet and calm? They have just moved from the highest level of primal over to the cognitive side, and they become very lethal. I want you to understand that that can happen in a moment. Okay, so let's break this primal aggression down. First, we have the trigger phase. Remember, the trigger phase are little explosions going off on our heads, and as long as we are coping, everything is copacetic. Everybody get that? It could be as dynamic as you want it to be, but as long as everybody's coping, everything is copacetic. And it also becomes a baseline for you. Every venue that you spend your time in has a baseline, doesn't it? What you expect it to look like. As an example, if I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport and it's Monday morning, 8 o'clock, what would I expect to see? What? Chaos. Well, yes, of course, chaos, but different than, what do you expect to see? You expect, yes, chaos is always in our airports, right? But what you expect to see are people in uniform, right? Suits, dressed up to work, little wheelie things that they're carrying wherever they're heading with their computers in it. High energy, right? High energy, they're going to work. At the same airport at 10 o'clock at night, as many of these people return, what do you expect to see? Ties loosened up, right? They're slumped over, they're spent. These are what our expectations are. How about Saturday morning at that same airport? What do you expect to see then? Children. Kids, comfortable, right? Casual, going to Granny's, or better still, to Walt Disney World in my area of the country, right? What we're saying is that every venue, regardless of, based upon the day, the time of day, etc., there is an expectation on your part as what that baseline should be. And from that baseline, we're looking for deviations, aren't we? Aggressive deviations, which we're about to define. So let's go through what those look like. At the very beginning, now this is very subtle, but this is the very beginning of primal aggression. What do we see? scattered and disjointed thinking. What does that mean? This is changed behavior now. Someone who's normally pragmatic, they're methodical, they've got their act together. They come in today scattered and disjointed. What does that mean? They're under stress. They're not coping with something, right? They're not coping with something. So this is a person who's beginning to escalate, and we're beginning to see it at the earliest possible moment. So what we recommend is you go up to this person in a genuine and caring way. Does everybody get that? Genuine and caring way. And you say to this person, "You look a little anxious today. Tell me about it." And you shut up. What's going to happen? They'll start to share with you, won't they? And as they share, they will start to diffuse. The investment of your time and talent for that moment not only may make another friend, but you may be investing in something that will diffuse someone who otherwise could turn into an incident. You see what we're saying? We want you to identify the emergence of aggression at the earliest possible moment. And in the primal and cognitive aggression, that's it. Scattered and disjointed thinking. Deterioration of fine motor skills in the next level. That's one of the things that we begin to see. They're unable to write effectively, the things that require that fine motor skills. They begin to lose that capability. Then hypervigilance. Remember we talked about hypervigilance beginning? They become very aware of what's going on around them, a little wide-eyed about what's going on around them, and questions our authority. Who are you to tell me I can't do this? They begin to question authority. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the beginning of primal aggression. Now we broach into the fourth level and a fourth stage. And remember, we've just gone past conflict. So it's quite likely this is aggression against another person. So that's what we start to observe. The aggressor refuses to comply, and they start to depersonalize. Let me talk to you a little bit about that. One of the things that Dave Grossman identifies in his wonderful book On Killing, which he was Pulitzer nominated for, also in On Combat, another excellent book of his, which incidentally I'm on his advisory board for, he identifies that it is not instinctual for one human to attack another. You have to disconnect, depersonalize, turn this person into an object in order to attack them. So what do we begin to see here? We start to see depersonalization. They start to disconnect from you. They become more belligerent, yelling. They're now more overt. And remember, once again, what's happening to this person? They're losing control, aren't they? Sweating, unusual swearing. This is for the person who swears all the time. That doesn't. No, we're not talking about that person. We're talking about the changed behavior. They're starting to swear. There are people who use intimidating types of language. Let me get to that here. Let's see. Perceives self as victim. What often happens here? How does a victim often respond to an aggressor? They start to fight back, don't they? And so what you get is this escalation that begins to occur, right? So this is contagious. So the person who starts aggressing, the other person starts aggressing on them. So then you get an aggressor who actually perceives themselves as a victim in this process, demonstrating intimidation and threats. It's interesting to point out that humans do not like to get into fistfights with other humans. Why? It means blood, torn clothing, expensive watches get broken, but most importantly, if there are other people watching what's going on, and there are always other people watching what's going on when there's an incident like this, right? And these people are people you care about, and you lose, it is total and complete humiliation, isn't it? So humans don't actually want to get into fistfights with other people. So what's actually going on here? You have one human trying to intimidate another human into submission. And they're just not going. So you have one person trying to intimidate another person into submission. This person is fighting back. And before you know it, you have this escalation. Loss of verbal control. This is when we approach into the crisis phase. What comes in the crisis phase, first and foremost, is the loss of verbal control. And what typically occurs after someone stops talking? It's when they usually strike out, isn't it? So what do we have next? We have complete loss of judgment. Remember, we've talked about how the fact is someone escalates, their quality of judgment diminishes. Well, now this individual is at a complete loss of judgment. Remember, this is a person losing control. I can't say that enough. So actions and words seem to fail them. They will actually get to the level where they will begin to growl. They'll get so angry. They're at the mammalian part of the brain at this point, animalistic behavior, and that's what we're seeing. And then finally, panic or becomes enraged, exhibits body language and behavior of an attacker. This is where the fight, flight, or freeze. And when I say fight, it's not fighting, it's flailing. There's no effective fighting going on here. Okay. That's the primal aggressor. The primal aggressor. Now let's take a look at the cognitive aggressor. This is intent-driven aggression. And what is the behavior we look for? Again, there's an incredible hint behind me. Tactical behavior. We see this almost from the outset of intent-driven aggression. Tactical behavior. Okay. As I said, it's really very simple, this behavior. What is your intent with this person? Is it in your interest and theirs, therefore a win-win as it ought to be? Or is it in your interest and to their detriment? In other words, you're going to victimize this person. At the lowest levels, you're becoming a victimizer. All right, let's take a look at what that looks like. Whoop. Yeah, here we are. At the lowest, we hit, first of all, the trigger phase. And during the trigger phase, what are we looking for? A baseline of behavior. A baseline of behavior that ought to be constructive and positive. Assertive, not aggressive. Then we broach into the escalation phase, and we have a hardening of point of view. If you are carrying on a relationship with someone, you expect that relationship to be based on a mutual communication, right? That is the foundation of an assertive relationship, is a mutual conversation for the betterment of all parties. This person is moving away from that, deviating from that, because they're hardening their point of view. They really don't care what you think. They're only concerned about their own point of view. Now, again, a very subtle, but it's the beginning of cognitive aggression. They begin deception. If I'm going to deceive, if I'm going to aggress against Michael, if I may use you again, if I'm going to aggress against Michael, the vast majority of the time I will never go against him face to face. It's too daunting, at least at these lower levels. So I don't want him to know that I'm aggressing against him. So what do? I lie. I deceive. Does everybody get that? So deception is a part of cognitive aggression. I don't want you to know that I'm deceiving because I'm trying to be covert about this. So I'm going to deceive you. So if someone is sharing a rationale with you, and that rationale just doesn't seem to add up, it could be because they're deceiving you. Does everybody get that? And if they're deceiving you, you need to ask more questions. That's my point of view. Again, very subtle part, but this is the beginning of intent-driven aggression. They create distance from you. Remember that disconnection? Humans have to disconnect, depersonalize, turn someone into an object. Incidentally, it is not humans. We talk about this either in the sense they can't keep eye contact with you or they begin to stare at you. Now, you may not know this, but humans do not stare at other humans. Humans stare at objects like TVs, horizons, paintings. So what does it mean if a human starts staring at you? They're turning you into an object. They're disconnecting from you. Now, obviously, we're not talking about the loving gaze of a parent for a child, are we? We're talking about that special stare. So we notice this disconnection, and that's one of the things that we're looking for. Someone who's normally been engaged, mutual in their view, is now starting to disconnect. Lacking empathy. Lacking empathy. They choose a side or fixate on one point of view. They start to lose trust. They undermine trust. Remember how important that element is. They abandon communication as a tool. In other words, this is a person you've normally had a good mutual conversation, a mutual discussion about how you should go forward as a community, as a couple, whatever that is. And now that person is starting to disconnect to the point where they're saying to you, my actions will speak for themselves. I'm no longer going to verbally communicate with you and come to an agreement and then move forward. I'm simply going to act, and my actions will speak for themselves. Does everybody see how that works? Now we've broached into the fourth stage of cognitive aggression. We've gone by, we're now starting out where conflict begins. Those first three elements give us the ability to get out in front of conflict and prevent it. It gives us the ability to get out in front of bullying and prevent it. Now, in our 2-day program, we go in depth on cognitive aggression, in a much more depth than we're able to hear, and you're actually able to see many more different forms of behavior. But remember, the key is the disconnection, the deception, those kinds of elements that add up to someone who's disconnecting from you. Changed behavior. Now we're into conflict, bullying, etc., etc. What do we see? Secretly create a distrust in the victim's own community. If I'm going to aggress against Michael here, I'm not going to aggress against him personally. Again, it's too daunting. So what do? I go to Michael's community. Those are the people that Michael likes and respects and loves, and who he wants to love, respect, and like him back. And I go to that community and I say, you know, this Michael, I just don't know. And they say, well, what do you mean? We like Michael. And I said, yeah, but I just don't know if I can trust him anymore. What have I just done? I've planted a seed which will grow like wildfire. I will undermine Michael from his own community as they develop a distrust for him. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is common practice in all organizations across our nation today. But it is outright overt aggression at the fourth level. This is important to understand because, as we've just shared, it is not instinctual for one human to attack another. Once human beings realize that that behavior is outright overt aggression at the fourth level, there is a natural propensity for them to move away from that behavior. Those that do not move away from that behavior, all you have to do is point to the chart, because now you'll bring in peer pressure and they will move away. Only the most ardent aggressors will continue on with that behavior, and those individuals you may have to mitigate. That's the beauty of understanding these continua. Because the more you understand them and share these with others, two very important things will happen. Number one, once they realize what is aggression, they will begin to move away from that behavior naturally. You won't have to force them. They will move, the vast majority of them will move away from that behavior, just as you would here now, hearing it. Once you realize that it's aggressive behavior, there's a natural propensity for you to move away from it. The second thing is, I have a friend of mine that is the head of the National Center for Higher Education Risk Management. This man goes all over the country trying to teach colleges and universities about the culture of reporting. I hear a lot of people talking about how important it is to get people to report what they see. Well, the problem we have today is they're not. And I can give you a very simple answer why. You see, humans tend to do what they believe is in their best interest, right? Right now, they don't see it as in their best interest to get involved, so they do not. It's that simple. Once they understand the aggression continuum and realize that this behavior down here can very easily generate in this behavior up here, where someone becomes a victim and that victim will likely be them, now they have the impetus to get involved. We, over the last 18 years, have seen cultures change completely as people begin to get involved, because now they can connect the dots. They can see that these lower level behaviors are threatening to them personally, that if permitted to continue, they themselves may become a victim. And they change. So, deliberately damages the reputation of another by exposing them publicly. As I shared with you my strategy with Michael in what we call planting the seed of distrust, but now we're becoming more overt about it. Where that was covert, we're becoming more overt. Now let me explain. Now that I have turned Michael's community against him, it's now us against him. And now, empowered by us, I feel more empowered to stand up and become more overt. So I now stand up with his own community and declare him an enemy of that community. Pretty vile, isn't it? But this is human-based aggression. Issue an ultimatum. Now I'm at a level that I feel so empowered. Remember, what is my objective with Michael? My objective with Michael is to get him to become submissive, right? I'm trying to intimidate him into submission. So now, before I attack, so now I'm going to offer the ultimatum. Proclaim the victim as the quintessential enemy of their own community. See, now I have a whole army, his community, against him. So I can stand up straight and proud and move toward him and try to squash him. I've now gone from lack of trust to making it distrustful, not worthy of our trust. Now I've evolved to the point where I've said he's the enemy, and now I'm claiming that he's the evil, the devil incarnate. That community will never turn back to him now. They've become my army against him. Now the complicit tactician comes into play. I have one last chance to compel him into submission before I'm going to attack him. This is the last chance. Also, it's a point for me to prepare for that attack. I'll set up the logistics. I'll do any planning. Cognitive aggressors like planning, incidentally. It's intent-driven. In terrorism, we have seen people that have surveilled a piece of property, to reconnoitered a property as many as 42 times before the attack was taken. This gives you ample time to identify this person and their intent to harm. Then, the planned attack without self-sacrifice. This is the 8th level. This is the person who may be prepared to give up their life for a cause, but their intention is to survive. And then finally, I'll take whatever action is necessary to accomplish it, including the loss of my own life or injury to me. Does everybody get that? Are there any questions about this before we move on? Yes, you have a question? No, you're writing. Okay. Okay, so what are we looking for? Cognitive aggression is intent-driven aggression. It is tactical in nature. The behavior we see is tactical. Primal aggression is someone losing control. What are we looking for? Disconnection, intention over motivation. I know that a lot of questions, I heard it being discussed as Jimmy and Chuck were talking this morning, about what is the motivation of this person. That's important to get in after the fact. And at some point it may be important to get during it, because you'll need to reconcile that person's motivation. But it is the intention that gives him away or her away. Incidentally, I often use the male pronoun because I've heard anywhere from 95 to 98% of the people affecting these kinds of violence are men. But does that mean for a moment that women can't be violent and have these intentions as well? In fact, the more and more these days, it is becoming more and more women. Women are becoming far more aggressive as we progress forward. Okay. They undermine the community, as I was talking about with Michael, where you plant the seed of distrust, and then you join causes that are destructive causes. So let's take an example here. Look in your book, or look up here and read this. I want to share this exercise with you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to read this, and once you have read it, I'm going to ask you to make a judgment. Whether you see this as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by raising your hand. 1 is unusual, wouldn't concern me. 3 is strange, would consider reporting. 5 is threatening, would report immediately. Okay, so please read this, and or in your book, and then when you're done reading it, look at me so I know that you're done, and then I will ask you to make a judgment in mass. Incidentally, while you're reading, I'll just mention to you that we're going to go on until we get through most of this, if not all of it. And so if you need to get up and go to the restroom or take a call or just need to stand up, because I know I've talked to people that have had back injuries and they just need to stand up, don't hesitate to do so. So glance up at me once you've read it so I can see that you're done. Okay? Now, How many people in the room see this as a 1? Raise your hand. How many see it as a 2? How many see it as a 3? Okay, thank you. How many see it as a 4? All right, thank you very much. And 5? Okay, all right. It is not my place to tell you this is a 3, 4, or 5. It is my place to get you to start connecting the dots. You may have gotten the first sentence from one person, the second sentence from another, or the third from another. You need to start connecting the dots. Now, for those of you who chose 5, what was it in this statement that caused you to believe it was a 5? Yes, as one person said, I'm not coming in tomorrow because... Absolutely. Now let's take a look at another one, the next one, to get an idea there. Please read it and then look at me when you're done so we can ask. Okay. How many people think this is a 1? All right. 1 back here. How many think it's a 2? Okay, very good. How many think it's a 3? Good. How many think it's a 4? Good. How many think it's a 5? None? A little more difficult, isn't it? Once again, my job is not to convince you that it's one or the other, but simply to get you to start connecting the dots. What are we afraid of here? What are we concerned about here? She's disconnected, but what could happen? She could become suicide, couldn't she? And let me share with you, we're getting more and more suicides, and there is a very short difference or fuse between suicide and murder-suicide. Someone simply has to say, I'm going to kill myself, and there are several people who helped me get here, and I'm going to take them out at the same time. I guess what I'm saying is, when do you find out that your judgment was wrong or right? After the fact. So maybe it is a wise decision to take a more conservative view and judge this to be more than maybe it is. At least that way, you've engaged someone and you've determined that there's not a problem. That's better than not engaging and under-predicting. Okay. This is a simple exercise. This really actually happened. And I wanted to share it with you because it really speaks to many of the things that we've talked about, both on a cognitive and primal side. And this is the kinds of things you might actually see. So let's quickly go through this. 2 of your employees, Jill and Ryan, dated for several months until he broke up with her for being less than truthful. Remember deception? For less than truthful, as well as she seems too argumentative for argumentative's sake. What is that telling you? This tends to be more of a primal thing, isn't it? She's finding herself anxious. And overly anxious with their relationship. Ryan simply declares her as nuts. Now, please understand, what are you going to get from Ryan? Jill's nuts, right? What you're going to get, the rest of it, is a conversation with Ryan or with people who Ryan's spoken to. So you need to go more in depth. After they broke up, Jill created a fan site, website called Everybody Loves Ryan, and posted pictures, intimate details over the relationship, and a daily blog in which she chronicles her belief that Ryan presents complete male perfection. Is there any aggression in that sentence, that statement? It's kind of assumed that maybe Ryan hasn't given permission for this. Maybe some questions should be asked. But these are subtle things. These are subtle things. Ryan tells Jill that he is flattered but asks her to stop. Jill seems to disconnect or detach and doesn't hear what Ryan is saying and says that she is just complimenting him. Is there aggression in this statement? Absolutely. Several months afterwards, Jill found out that Ryan has begun dating Ho. In an attempt to turn their common friends and fellow employees, planting the seed of distrust, Jill liberally uses the obvious pun with her in her blog, saying that Ryan is now dating a huge hoe, and she seems to be obsessed about this. Is this aggressive behavior? Ryan is now, when Ho's name is mentioned, Jill becomes flushed. What is that telling you? This is primal aggression, isn't it? What are we seeing? That building of cognitive and primal aggression occurring, don't we? By email, Ryan asked Jill to stop writing about him, and he goes, or he will go to their mutual friends and fellow employees and tell them that she's nuts. Remember what we said? What do victims often do? They aggress against the aggressor. Then, Ryan shares with Ho that he has dreamed about taking her out and wonders how difficult it would be. In his dreams, he is Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. Often these things are laced in other types of things that seem innocuous, but they're very, very dangerous. In early May, Jill went to Ryan's apartment armed with a machete. She threatens Ryan and Ho with it, telling them that she has every right to write anything she wants. On her way out the door, Jill buries the blade in Ryan's door and left it behind. This is often where you are called in. Is this where you want to be called in? If you have eyes and ears across your church campus that are identifying these kinds of behaviors that can call them into you, you can get out way out in front of this. There's absolutely no reason for you to have been engaged at this point if you've got your eyes and ears out there. In mid-May, Jill's roommate reports that she is not eating, appears not to care due to her hatred for Ryan and Ho. What does that tell us? Yep, this is a person approaching suicide and potentially murder-suicide. Now, as it is in real life, she was engaged by counselors and they were able to help her, and she moved away from this. But the answer could have been much different. And we are hearing more and more and more about the murder-suicides, aren't we? More and more and more. Okay. This is very important to understand. This is the judicious interview. Is body language and behavior always 100% correct? Of course not. So for this reason, we developed the judicious interview. The judicious interview is a scientific cause and effect principles being applied where you take an action or you ask a question that will generate a predictable result. Predictable, telling you that this is a person whose intentions are to harm. So let's take a quick look at this within the time constraints we have. What are you seeing here? First of all, didn't we tell you there was a direct link between aggression, the production of adrenaline, the increase in the heart rate, and the resulting body language and behavior, right? Well, there you have the pulse rate, the beats per minute, from 65 up to 185 plus. There they are. When I was working with the Army, we were using infrared and thermal imaging. If we could infrared a square inch of skin, we could read remotely what that person's pulse rate was, and in real time see it go up and down. The problem was the equipment was this big, and we needed it this big, and we could go that far, but we needed to go much further. So that they were still working on. But when I say that there's a connection, a measurable connection between aggression and the pulse rate and the resulting body language and behavior, what you're seeing here is it being played out in this graphic illustration. So when we go to 115 beats per minute, which is elevated, a primal aggressor, and we engage that primal aggressor, you can see there's going to be a bump. Anytime anybody walks into your private space and you're elevated as an aggressor, there's going to be a slight bump. But if you approach them properly in a neutral and professional way, which we talked to you about, then it should diffuse very quickly thereafter. Then we go up to 155 beats per minute, and again, if we approach, this is much elevated. But if we engage in a neutral and professional way, there will be a bump, but then it'll diffuse quickly. Again, remember we talk about approaching this person with the resources to maximize the result. We also said that you can go too far. You've allowed this person to escalate too far, and they go beyond your ability to diffuse them. And here we see that reflected in 65 beats per minute, and that person becomes assaultive the moment you approach them because they are out of control. Or your entering into the picture has forced them out of control. But let's take a look at the cognitive aggressor. What do we see with the cognitive aggressor? 65 beats per minute. Think about the calm that this person is. Remember those video clips that I showed you and how calm and deliberate this person is? That's what we see. Calm, cool, deliberate, committed. However, this is a person who is prepared to give up their life for a cause. But the moment we approach them, we start seeing primal aggression, significant primal aggressors. And we are looking for those to determine whether this person is our next aggressor or not. Now, does this individual care anything about their victim? This cognitive aggressor in the crisis phase? Do they care anything at all about their own well-being? No. What do they care about? Remember, tactical. What do they care about? Their mission, their goal, their objectives, right? If you do anything at all that affronts their goal, their objectives, their mission, they will immediately start firing off primal aggression indicators. The first and foremost one is the one I call the "oh God" reflex. That says, oh God, they're onto me, and if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to blow my mission. What does this cause? It causes a pause and then perspiration over the brow and upper lip. Those are indicators you're looking for. Those are L2, you see, level 2 types of visuals you're looking for. Now, I typically recommend that you approach this person covertly. Yes, with security. Yes, armed security, but covertly. Because you want, if you at this point think you have a person of interest, and you likely do, but you want to affirm it, we recommend you go to the next level, which is you bring presence to bear. Many of you are law enforcement, you know what that means. You bring presence to bear by saying, I'm an officer, I want to know what the hell you're doing here. That'll get the person will go into third, fourth, and fifth levels, and yes, they'll probably get to probable cause. If not, reasonable suspicion, you'll have a chance to search them if you're a certified officer, and that's what I'm going to recommend happens next. So through a process, you can make sure that this person isn't of interest, but you have gotten out in front of that horrific moment of commitment. This person has come on the church campus, into the parking lot, onto the campus, and into the building, and if you have an army of eyes and ears out there, you have all these opportunities to identify that person before that horrific moment of commitment. But it also gives you the ability, if you're covert, to go up to that person and identify whether they are, because they don't need to know your security. You can just be a parishioner asking questions, a caring parishioner, as far as they know. And you can determine. I love Jerry Glazebrook. Jerry Glazebrook used to be the head of Dr. Kissinger's detail. And he was one of the first people. I met him actually because when I was working with Aon Corporation, I was introduced to Rudy Giuliani's team, the Giuliani Partnership. And Jerry was there at the time as their fulfillment guy. They'd make all these promises, and Jerry had to fulfill them. But Jerry was one of the most innovative guys when it came to executive protection because he did it covertly. One of the guys that he had was the guy Waxman family, the guy that owns the Limited and Victoria's Secrets and a whole litany of businesses. And this man would go all over the country, all over the world, going into his stores. And he had a personal assistant himself. And before, they had bodyguards all around him, 7, 8 bodyguards, and they would bump into themselves as they went through the doors. But when Jerry came on, they did everything covertly. In fact, they did so covertly that Mr. Waxman would say, "Where the hell's Jerry?" And the personal assistant would get on his phone and call. And he said, "Sir, he's right to your left." And he would turn around, and there would be Jerry. But you see, Jerry realized that he could identify an aggressor far easier in the crowd than he could moving along with the executive. He also realized that gave him the opportunity to approach any suspicious person, and with my knowledge, he was able to determine whether this was someone who is just excited, primal aggressor, excited about this person being there, and or angry, but not something could be easily diffused, and the person didn't even need to know that he was a security person. However, if he was a threat, he could identify him as a threat. He was close enough to stop anything from occurring. Look, in executive security, you have one of two choices under normal circumstances. You either leave the person alone or you take them down. No client likes you taking people down, because inevitably there'll be someone there with a camera, especially today with the smartphones. So you don't want that to happen. So what this did is it gave Jerry the opportunity to quietly, covertly go up, identify the threat level, engage, and walk the person off the premises. And you can use techniques to walk them off, and they don't even realize they're being walked off. So, the judicious interview. Intent-driven aggression is just that. It's tactical, but at the lower levels of aggression, sometimes it is simple enough to ask this question. Help me understand the intent behind your behavior. Or, help me understand the intent behind what you just said. I love that word intent, because it takes a person right to the core of their motivation. And notice how I framed it. I'm not saying, what do you mean by that, am I? I'm saying, help me understand the intent behind what you just said. That's all I'm saying. It gives that person the opportunity to share with you what the core of their motivation is, giving you the ability to reconcile whatever that motivation is. And often you can do it covertly, without a scene, without anybody seeing that you're even engaging. You're just an interested person in the crowd asking questions in a genuine and caring way. Let's talk about how do we try to get out in front and prevent. Well, when we think about, now that we can measure emerging aggression, we now want the ability to get out in front and persuade. Because we're measuring emerging aggression, we want to be able to engage in just the right way to maximize our result. We have to persuade. Well, there's a model for persuading. For persuasion, it's a simple autocratic or democratic. Autocratic is militaristic. Come here, sit down, come with me, whatever that might be. Democratic means I give someone the time and space to make their own decision. Ladies and gentlemen, that didn't work for us. Why? Because someone could choose to be aggressive, and that's unacceptable. So we threw that word democratic out and replaced it with the word convincing. You see, our challenge is to convince this person to do what we want them to do, move away from their aggression. Why? Because it's good for them. Why? Because it's good for them. Remember, humans tend to do what they perceive as in their best interest. And the very best convincer does so in a way that the aggressor thinks it's their idea. The very best convincing is a person who convinces the aggressor to go in the way that you want them to go, away from their aggression. Why? Because it's good for them and they think it's their idea. Realize how powerful that is. If I go in and say, stop doing this, the moment in an autocratic way, I turn my back, they go right back to it. If I convince them, if I take the time, energy, and talent to apply myself, and I convince them that this other behavior is in their best interest, they now are doing it under their own power. They're doing it because they want to do it, and I no longer have to supervise them because they're doing it because they want it. That's the difference. We talked about trust, but if someone has made a commitment to injure somebody else and you walk in the room and you've taken the challenge to prevent that person from harming someone else, are you not seen as a threat? And you have to get from threat to trust now, right? Instantly. How do you do that? Well, I can do something kind of special. I can tell each and every one of you who you trust. You know who you trust? You trust people who look like you, talk like you, act like you, dress like you, speak like you. You trust you. So how do you develop trust with someone else? You find things in common with that person and you build on those commonalities, out of which you develop rapport, out of which you develop trust. Let's make this very clear. If someone trusts you 100%, will they not go anywhere and do anything you want them to? Right? If they trust you 100%, they will do for you whatever you need them to do. So what must you do? You must get from threat to trust, and the closer you get to 100% trust, the more effective you're going to be in moving that person away from their aggression. It's also important to realize that this is the only bridge between you and the aggressor, and if you're unable to cross that bridge or get them to cross it to you, you just won't have any success with this person. And it's also important to understand that trust is not instinctual. Trust is earned. What do you mean? Does that mean that I have to engender trust with someone I may not even like or trust myself? Yes, that's correct. Do emotions impede your ability to persuade? Absolutely. Both emotions and attitudes are contagious. We all hear about how panic is contagious. Did you also realize that calm is also contagious? Absolutely. Attitudes are contagious. If your attitude is, well, I'm dead, what do you think the result's going to be? Attitudes are also contagious. So one of the things that we talk about is emotional weighting. This is where you're carrying on a conversation with someone, and because of that conversation, both because your logic and reason and rationale are prevailing, you're winning this conversation. But you're dealing with someone who doesn't like to lose. So what do? They get red-faced, they get intimidating, they start getting emotional with you. Why? Because that individual's learned that emotions override logic, reason, and rationale if you let it. It's far more potent, emotion is, and they want to win this conversation. And the more emotional they can get you, the more they can spike your emotions, the more they will move you away from your logic and reason where you're winning and they'll win. It's really that simple. So what must you do? You must maintain your calm. How do you maintain your calm? Cycle breathing, very good, very good. What is the best nonverbal facial expression to share with an aggressor? A genuine and caring smile. Why? It says, I'm quietly confident, that's not cocky, I'm happy to help, I'm enthusiastic, I am a solution person, I have a pocket full of solutions, all we need to do is find the right solution for you. In the most dire sets of circumstances, I would spend 3 pages, 3 slides on developing ideas to help people in the most dire sets of circumstances until one day I saw the SEALs training. And the SEALs were having a problem with their training because over 50% of them were falling out of the training. So they needed a way to help these SEALs stay together. So they came up with what they call the Big 4 techniques. They're brilliant. So brilliant that I have adopted them. And in essence what they have, and we'll move right along here, goal setting. You have to keep the frontal lobe in contact, engaged the entire process. And the only way to do that is to realize that although we need to do things in small chunks, in the SEALs training, when they get them up in the morning, all they think about is getting to fuel next, which is breakfast. So that's their goal, is to achieve that end. Not to get through the whole day, not to get to lunch, but simply to get to breakfast. Well, if you're in dire circumstances, you're simply saying, if this happens, I'm going to respond that way. If that happens, I'm going to respond this way. You're going through an if-then process, and it's short term. But you've got to keep your frontal lobe engaged. Mental rehearse. We talked about the power of visualization. I strongly recommend that you consider the kinds of things that can go wrong and use visualization to identify those things and the kinds of solutions you'll have. It does a number of things to help you. But first, every time you prepare visually, it takes you one step more closer to being able to handle it and do it in a proper way. But also, it also is inoculating you against the stress of that occurring. Stress inoculation. Self-talk. If you see negatives, you've got to turn them into positives. We tend to go through 300 to 1,000 thoughts per minute. We need to turn those thoughts into constructive, positive, as opposed to destructive or negative thoughts. And then finally, arousal control, which represents what? Cycle breathing, cycle breathing. Realize how powerful a tool that is and how important it is to practice that so that you can use it effectively when you need it. Okay, This, incidentally, our software platform, the CAPS program, Critical Aggression Prevention System, if you go to our website, you will see it all described there and discussed, so that if you want to share it with someone, just refer them to the website. Also, I'm happy to, if you want to get a conference call so that I can help talk to them, I'm happy to do that. We'll arrange that. But here's the actual techniques that we use. No, you don't have them in your book. This is my stock and trade. This is how we've broken it down in the software. We have 8 different categories of behavior, communication, interaction, demeanor, facial expressions, tactical movement, tactical clothing, and tactical articles. This enables you, notice here that you have mild, moderate, elevated, severe, and extreme, along with the 9 levels of aggression, which gives you the threat level: mild, moderate, elevated, severe, and extreme. And it gives you the ability, the red is primal aggression, the blue is cognitive aggression. It enables you at a glance, using measurable observables to identify where a person is, determine what level of aggression they are, therefore what kind of resources do you need to approach that person to maximize your result. There's the pictorial view of it with first observers, qualified responders, and software platform, the aggression managers. This is actually what you see. This is the drop down that you would see on your software. You'll notice the information about who the person is. If you know who it is, you put their name in. If you don't, you put the descriptors in that help you identify this person. And then you put in the drop downs, and you notice there's an IRV here. It means the incident risk value of 6 or 5. And the color-coded corresponding it. That color code tells you where on the scale of threat, mild, moderate, elevated, severe, and extreme it happens to be, but most importantly, it also tells you what is the highest level of threat, so that you can go prepared with the right resources to make sure that you're going to maximize your result. Here it is in the actual incident reporting form. This reporting form can be used not only for aggression, but alcohol abuse or a variety of other things, issues you might have in your facility. But it also, up here, it shows you, excuse me, let me go back here. It shows you up here the, well, I guess it doesn't show very well, but it shows you who's contacted, who on your team has been notified and what they have done. It also shows you what kind of actions you wish to take, because if you wish to take an action like someone needs counseling or something, you can then put them through counseling. It becomes a tracking system for that individual. And the real value here is at the end of the year, people like to come to churches where they feel safe. Abraham Maslow tells us the most basic kind of need is to feel safe. So whether they do it consciously or unconsciously, they want to come to your church, they want to feel safe there. Or employees want to come to work and feel safe. So the ability for you, we don't expect a lot of 7, 8s, and 9s. We expect a lot of 3, 4s, and 5s. And let's say at the end of the year you have 100 of these 3, 4s, and 5s, and you deem that 90 of them are no longer a threat to your facility. The remaining 10, 5 are in counseling and 5 have been suspended until with further review. So the bottom line, you can proclaim that your churches in your community, in your proximity, are safe in an empirical way. Think about the value that would bring, especially as we hear about the next shooting. Also, this is where we track them. You notice that we notice that someone is becoming less a threat as the time goes on, and you can actually show. This also is important as far as if someone sues and says you should have protected me. You can demonstrate you've done everything possible to make your facility as safe as possible, even from legal. And that is, I'm not saying that it's. What I'm saying is it takes you down a path to legal defensibility. Okay, we come to the final slide. Remember, we're looking for tactical behavior. Who would like to take a stab at who the terrorist or terrorists, plural, are? Yes? Brett?
You showed that slide with the red circle around the guy in the blue in the middle.
I did go too far with the red circle, didn't I? I did go too far there, yes. Yes. Well, all right, Brett, but tell me why. Why do you see those?
Well, for one thing,
These are the 7 bombers of London, 9 days before they blew themselves up. Those 3 individuals. But what tells us that they're being, the picture shows us a lot, the video showed us a lot more. What tells us, what shows us that these people are being tactical? What are they looking at?
Everybody else, they're disconnected from everybody else that's
What?
walking around going from place to place. They're just sitting there watching.
And if you look at the video, you see that they're very tactical in their behavior. They look at each other, they nod for approval, they move on. It's just as though we're a squad. You could put weapons in their hands and uniform on them, and they would be completely consistent. But what are they looking at right now? No? What are they looking at? They're looking at the cameras. Yes, they're reconnoitering. They're surveilling. Absolutely. This is how you identify. Now, does this alone tell you they're the next terrorists? Of course not. That's where the judicious interview is so critical to this process. Well, I hope you've enjoyed these last 2 hours we've spent together. If you need my help, there's my telephone numbers, emails, website. It gives you a lot of information about it. If we can be of any service, I'll be here for the rest of the day. If you have questions that come up, don't hesitate to pull me aside and have a conversation. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.